Okay, we're ready. I think we should talk about the new 30-minute format. Are you recording?
I'm recording.
Okay.
All right, friends, we have had some pretty mixed reviews on social media. I don't know the 30-minute thing is working or not. Are we going to have to change it?
Okay, everyone who likes the shorter version, could you please write in? Because I feel like I'm losing ground here.
The people who don't like it are being very vocal.
Everybody who liked the longer version, do write in. It's absolutely fine.
No.
Also,
We've already heard that one.
If some of the, and also my kind of machine, I've got one of these bot machines that writes the saying, I want longer ones. So kind of, it's AI. Oh, whoops, let's slip. Right.
We'd love to hear from you. Here's the episode. Hello and welcome to Outrage+Optimism. I'm Tom Rivett-Carnac.
I'm Cristiana Figueres.
And I'm Paul Dickinson.
This week, we talk about the fact that conserving and protecting the natural world is a critical part of dealing with the climate crisis and keeping us within 1.5 degrees. We speak to Rita El Zaghloul, the head of the 30 by 30 initiative, and we have music from Mr. Bruce.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for being here. Okay, so this week we are going to delve into the critical issue of nature. This has always been a sort of poor cousin to the climate issue. It's never really received the attention it deserves. But of course, we can't deal with the climate crisis unless we actually have a proper plan to protect and restore nature, as well as dealing with all of the ways in which we interact with the natural system through food and food commodities and all these other different things. So that we are going to set out for you this week in our pre-chat, and then we're going to have a conversation with an amazing woman who runs this 30 by 30 campaign. Christiana, do you agree that nature has always been underrepresented?
Well, first, I agree that you have totally misnamed nature, because the global atmosphere is also part of nature.
Yes, sorry,
Yeah,
of course.
there you
As
go.
indeed
There
are
you
we
see.
and all of our
There you see.
listeners.
It's
The
also
atmosphere,
part of
yes.
nature.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so rewind what
Yeah.
Tom actually means when he says
What he's trying to say.
nature. What he's trying to say
Not doing very well.
is not doing very well is the land surface and the ocean surface of this planet is what he means. But
We think,
and that includes all of our little animal friends and all our plant friends. Okay, that's what he means by nature. But that's not the sum total of nature, Tom. Right. Now, what was your question, now that we've settled that piece?
I don't know. Let's let Mr. Dickinson summarize it for us. What was the question, Paul?
Broadly speaking, is it? Would you agree, Christiana, that this the 30 by 30 campaign looking to restore biodiversity and protect 30% of the world's oceans and land by 2030 has been the poor cousin of the decarbonization efforts represented by the UNFCCC?
Pretty good, Paul.
Was
You
it
were
clear?
paying attention. Very good. He was paying attention.
Knocked it out the
Now
park.
I think that Christiana, I think you should summarize that for the listeners, because I think there's a few acronyms in there.
So, have we developed a business model to reduce emissions from the energy sector, but we have not developed yet a business model to reduce emissions from the land sector or even restore land and oceans? The answer is yes, correct. We have not developed a business model. And therefore, we are lagging behind on that. And will we be able to hit our climate targets without that piece? No. So a big missing piece. And thanks to everyone who is reminding us of that and trying to bring it to attention.
And the situation is pretty serious, of course. I mean, we know from recent reports that 75% of land surface is significantly altered as a result of human activity. 66% of the ocean is experiencing cumulative impacts, and 85% of wetlands have been lost. So what that actually shows is that only 2.8% of land on Earth could be considered intact from a sort of wild nature perspective, of course, and that's not all what we're talking about. And so, the 30 by 30 campaign, of course, is critical in so many ways. But one interesting way to start thinking about nature is to divide it into three parts, right? So first of all, there's the conservation agenda. That is protecting what we have. That is of the utmost urgency, protecting those rainforests and those boreal forests and temperate forests that are still intact or semi-intact and have this incredible treasure trove of biodiversity contained within them. That's the first piece, to conserve what we have. The second piece is to restore what we've lost. We've lost enormous amounts of biodiversity and land and tree cover and natural ecosystems, and actually study after study has confirmed that restoring those ecosystems has enormous benefits from a climate perspective and from an economic perspective in supporting human settlements and livelihoods and health, etc. And the final piece is all of the ways in which we as humanity interact with nature, the food systems, the commodity trading, all these other different elements, that also has to work. We need to understand those three buckets and try to work to ensure that our relationship with nature gets better and better across all three of those. And that includes natural systems as well as the ways humans interact with them. Although, of course, as Christiana points out, humans are part of nature. So this emergency is every bit as urgent as the climate crisis. And part of why we wanted to talk to you about this today is we think...
This emergency is part of the climate crisis.
Absolutely.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you,
Tom.
That's the point.
That's the
and
point.
finally, all right, I'm going to make up for it all now.
Okay.
Finally, this year, this issue of nature is going to be reincorporated and placed back where it belongs, contextualized within the overall attempt to deal with the climate crisis and the biosphere crisis by bringing it into the COP and having a big breakthrough in the Biodiversity Convention as well. Correct?
From your lips to God's ears. Now, should we see what Rita has to say about this?
Rita is an old friend of yours. Would you like to introduce her?
Well, Rita is an amazing woman, right? Rita Zaghloul, or if she insists on her double barrel name like Tom does, it is Rita El Zaghloul. Fantastic Costa Rican woman who used to work while she was studying to get her advanced degree. She was working at the Costa Rican mission at the UN, and I have never seen a sponge that absorbed as much information and knowledge and wisdom in one place for then to very quickly take up the leadership position that she now has as representing Costa Rica in this HAC, High Ambition Coalition, a coalition of 70 countries led by the UK, Costa Rica, and France. And she is absolutely the motor behind all of this, just revving up momentum for this very, very difficult issue.
Great, let's hear from her.
Great, and we will be back after with more analysis.
Rita, thank you so much for joining us on Outrage and Optimism. And the two of us being Costa Rican citizens, we just have to announce to the world that this is a very special week for Costa Rica because we are celebrating 200 years of independence. So happy independence anniversary to all Costa Ricans around the world. And Rita and I happen to be very proud of our country. So I'm sure she is also celebrating from New York. But moving on to the topic that brings us here together, I would love for you to explain for our listeners, Rita, what does 30 by 30 mean and why is it important? What is the current situation that we have on both land surface as well as ocean area that makes the 30 by 30 target absolutely critical?
Thank you so much, Christiana, for giving that, for making that question. I think the 30 by 30 target specifically aims for the protection of 30% of our land and ocean by 2030. This, of course, is not only a matter of a quantity, so it's not only a matter of the area coverage, but of course of the quality of this area. While we were constructing this coalition, and just to give a bit of a background, it was first presented by the president of Costa Rica in 2019. It was mentioned at the United Nations Climate Action Summit, actually, in 2019. That was the first time that he spoke about the importance of the 30 by 30, because this is precisely what the scientists were telling us, right? In 2019, and as you might know, there was the IPBES report that was presented, and it showed that 1 million planet and animal species face extinction. And Of course, we also noticed that we've lost 60% of terrestrial wildlife and 90% of the big ocean fish. And so facing those very alarming numbers and really trying to see how we could curb the biodiversity loss and to shed some light on the climate crisis, on the biodiversity crisis, this coalition was created to precisely shed the light also on biodiversity and to bring the synergies between the two crises, the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis.
Could you just go into that one little bit more? Because our listeners are somewhat more familiar with climate issues than they are with biodiversity. And just for those who heard Rita say IPBES, that is the equivalent of the IPCC in climate. Those are the scientists who produce the big scientific reports on biodiversity. But could you, in a nutshell, explain to us what is that overlap? What is the interlinkage between biodiversity and climate? And why do we have to treat them as actually being two sides of the same coin?
Yes, of course. Well, scientists are clear that we need to urgently expand our protected areas and conserved areas to at least 30% of the planet's land and ocean by 2030, not only to curb the biodiversity loss, but also because protecting those ecosystems would provide a third of the climate mitigation needed by 2030. I also wanted to just give your audience just a bit of a data on a recent UNEP WCMC report that found that conserving 30% of land in strategic location could safeguard 500 gigatons of carbon stored in vegetation and soils. And so I think those are mainly very broad ideas of the interlinkages between the two crises. And I think it's been basically how we've been working since the beginning, trying to bring the conversation also not only into the biodiversity world, but trying to also bring that attention into the climate world as well on the biodiversity crisis.
And Rita, there's so many similarities between these two actually interlinked challenges. One is the whole issue of equity, right, which is so front and central and goes so deep in the climate discussion, but also in the biodiversity, because we understand that that preserving some of the areas, whether it's land or oceans, that are currently under either indigenous rights or developing country areas, some people would say, well, but if we preserve and conserve those regions, then is that not going to stop economic development? Is that not going to keep us in poverty? Which is exactly the same argument that we have on the climate side. And I would love to know from you on the biodiversity side of the same coin, how is that being dealt with?
That's an excellent question, Christiana, and I'll divide it into two, because I think it's the issue of the role of indigenous peoples and local communities is central to this 30 by 30 goal. I think it raised, we've been trying to raise this awareness from the beginning with the 30 by 30 goal. We have to really implement it correctly in partnership with indigenous people and local communities, respecting their rights and, of course, working with them as the most effective stewards of our biodiversity. In the High Ambition Coalition, we have created a task force specifically to work with indigenous people and local community groups to make sure that our narrative and how we are trying to implement and to get to the 30 by 30 goal will be in line and hand in hand, having the IPLC as central partners in this 30 by 30 goal. Now, moving into the first part of your question with regards to the economic aspect of it. I mean, the economists have said that it's not only feasible, but it is also beneficial. Several reports have been released, but I will, for instance, refer to a report from Cambridge that tell us that the benefits of the 30 by 30 target outweigh the cost of establishing protected areas. It outweighs it by a ratio of 5-1. And I think that after the COVID pandemic, we have to really, really make sure to put the nature and the nature sector in the central of our discussions. Another report that I wanted to also share with you is the McKinsey report that showed that the 30 by 30, it will create up to 30 million jobs, and it could be created in ecotourism, sustainable fisheries, and it could directly add 650,000 new jobs in conservation management, amongst others. So I think that this argument of not being economically wise or not being good for our development, it's really not a correct argument in the sense it's actually the exact opposite of this argument.
Well, Rita, if the economic case is there, I'm sure it should happen. It's such a privilege for me to wish two Costa Ricans a very, very happy birthday on the 15th of September, 200 years since independence. And that's actually what I want to ask about Costa Rica. You, as a country, I believe, have already achieved the majority of your 30 by 30 target. Is it 27%? How was it implemented, and how could it serve as a model for other countries? What have been the challenges that you've overcome? How did you do it?
Yes, of course. And maybe, thank you so much for that, Paul. Maybe just to highlight that it has been also a challenge for Costa Rica. I mean, talking a bit about our ocean bit of the equation, we have not been so successful. And so there we have a very, very, very big challenge. We only have 2.67% of our ocean that is protected. So we have a gigantic task, and we are doing all our possible to really accelerate our action in that sense. I think on land we have been much more, our model have been much more successful. We are now at 25.5% of our land, and we have over 60% of our area is forest covered. So it's we have been very successful in the land part, and it has been really part of our DNA, right? It's been our model, our development model. We have been trying to really see how we could. I mean, we are a middle income country, right? We also very much we have this. The financial bit of it that is also a challenge for us, but we have been very successful in doing it, trying to include nature in all our sectors. And I think that with the payment of ecosystems that we implemented over 20 years ago, it has been really pillar for us. I think it's something that we are very, very much proud of. I think this is mainly part of our success.
But Rita, how can we get some of this DNA into other countries? If our listeners are in other countries, how do you get this DNA?
That's exactly what we're trying to do with the coalition, right? It's not only about raising the awareness of the importance of biodiversity at the highest level and at government level. It's also taking this awareness to the public, right? And I'm so glad to be sharing with you this today, because I'm hoping to bring this light and shed this light on biodiversity, not only at the government level or at the scientist level, but to take it to all across society level. So that's why I'm very grateful for it. I think it's very important to tell the story. It's very important to be very ambitious and to really try to lead by example. And that's exactly what we're trying to do.
So in Costa Rica, Rita, I know how we did it. We taxed carbon, actually. We taxed fossil fuels, put a tax on them more than 20 years ago. And that's where the government...
20 years ago.
That's where the government gets funding for the payment of environmental services. But in order to prevent this podcast from being only about the wonders of Costa Rica, we have to ask, where would the finance for 30 by 30 come from in other countries, Rita? Yeah. Because, that is always the question. First, you have to get over the hump of, does this make sense? You've already argued, yes, it makes economic sense for any country and for the planet to do this. Okay, let's say that we agree to that. Next question, where is the finance going to come from? If you're not Costa Rica, what are the current streams of thought of how do we get this finance in place?
It's a very good question. And actually, this is exactly where our focus within the coalition is trying to turn now. It's on how we implement this 30 by 30. And I think it's a whole of government effort that we need to do. We need to have the public sector being very active in it. And we have heard many countries such as France committing, for example, to 30% of their climate finance for biodiversity. The UK has committed $3 billion over the next 5 years for biodiversity. Germany, amongst others that have been trying to commit, but we need more, right? And it's not only actually the United States in the biodiversity world. It's a bit of a different situation than with the climate world, because for the CBD there are observers. So in that sense, they are not formally taking part of the negotiation, but I mean, I understand that for the US, they have committed for 30 by 30 at a national level. And the idea would be to try to engage with them for them to also help with the implementation and increase their finance regarding biodiversity as well. So we're in discussions in that sense.
So Rita, with momentum growing the way you have been explaining, we need to ask the final question, which we ask all our wonderful guests on this podcast, and that is on the spectrum between outrageous outrage and hopeful optimism. Where do you place yourself, and where do you place the hack in its 30 by 30 target?
I have to say that this week precisely, I feel much more optimistic, and I'm guessing the hack as well, because we, after the IUCN and the motions supporting the 30 by 30 that came out of it, it created a lot of momentum. And also next week we will have a high level event at the highest level, heads of state and heads of government in New York. And I think it's bringing a lot of momentum. So I'm today, as we speak, 14th of September, I'm much more into the optimistic spectrum. But I have to say, some days it's not that way.
Some days it's not that way. That's right.
Yep.
And some days we harbor both.
Exactly.
Rita, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time. Congratulations on everything that you're doing to get the 30 by 30 target out there into the consciousness of everyone who needs to understand the critical importance of it. Thank you so much. And again, felicidades por la independencia.
Thank you so much, Christiana, Tom, and Paul. I mean, it's a great honor, and thank you for giving me the space to also bring this awareness to your podcast. I really, really appreciate the time and really enjoyed the conversation. Feliz Día de la Independencia, Cristiana.
Feliz día.
Thank you.
Beso,
Thanks so
abrazo,
much.
ciao.
Thanks for your leadership.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
So how great to sit down. I mean, what an inspiring woman, what an amazing moment. It's just unbelievable the way she's like taken this seed of possibility and she's transformed it into this incredible momentum that's going to change the world. What did you both learn? What did you particularly pick up from that conversation?
I mean, one thing I particularly noticed that there's a part of this, earlier we were saying it was far away from kind of, the conventional action on climate change. But weirdly enough, like changing the fuel mix of a power station or how steel is produced, is kind of quite remote to a lot of people. But actually, I hardly know anyone who's got, any kind of land who isn't rewilding and trying to bring nature back. So I think there's quite a strong guttural link between this intergovernmental effort and something that people very naturally feel is an important part of responding to climate change. Using nature to draw down and to come back. I mean, the problem is we chopped it all down, let it grow back up again. Christiane looks thoughtful.
I actually like the way this 30 by 30 target is challenging us on, I think, 2 steps of understanding what we need to do. The first step is to go beyond the energy world into the natural world. That already is a conceptual leap for most people. But the second step that I think is very helpful is that most people, when they think about the natural world, they will immediately think about land. They will immediately think about wetlands, forests, grasslands, etc. And they don't think about the ocean. And so what I love about this 30 by 30 is it puts both of those into the same bucket. We need to protect 30% of land area and 30% of the ocean expanse. And that is incredibly helpful. Much more difficult, frankly, to protect ocean expanse than to protect land area. Much more difficult, but equally as important. And so I just love the way they just, went for the full thing, right? The full Monty. Let's just put land and ocean, because they could also have just said, let's just put land in there.
Yeah.
And the fact that they just went straight and said, let's put both. Let's just look at the surface of the planet as it is, covered by either water or land, and let's put both in. I think it is remarkable, visionary, very, very challenging, and exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah. And just, I mean, it's so beautifully branded, right? I mean, you know, as we talked about with her, it's been so difficult for nature to cut through as an issue that resonates with people around the world because it's so broad, as we talked about. It's about conservation, about restoration. It's about different elements of our interaction with that system. So it's difficult for people to get their arms around. But 30 by 30, protect 30% of nature. People respond to it. It doesn't seem too high. Seems like a reasonable amount. More nature in people's lives, more natural systems improves the quality of life. And to do it by 2030, it's just a wonderful symmetry. So I actually think what's interesting about the way that this has landed at the moment, and I say this sitting in the UK, is the UK has a conservative right-leaning government that is doing its best to lead on climate, although with some challenging different issues, against a conservative base that frankly isn't that interested in it, which is the same as many right-of-centre electorates around the world. And part of the way they're doing it is they're leading on nature. So actually, you know, Boris Johnson and Zach Goldsmith are making a big effort to make nature the centerpiece of the COP. And they're doing that because they care, but they're also doing it because they want that to be the message that goes to their voters rather than conservative government agrees with Extinction Rebellion that we should all, you know, stop driving around, etc. So actually, as a crossover issue that can be picked up by right-of-centre governments, it's a very neat campaign that's well encapsulated, that can be communicated to core voters, that has deep conservative principles as part of it. It'd be great to see more political mileage made of that fact because it's very powerful.
Conservative and conservation, something where people can really reach across the aisle. I mean, who can be against a tree or a frog or a fish?
Plus, you know, a major endorsement for Costa. I mean, that was a lovely comment, Paul. Or a lobster. Who can be against a lobster?
I mean, when I say a fish, I mean like very, very large numbers of fish.
No, and lobsters. Even, let's talk about lobsters.
No, we're not going to talk about them. But also fish that people don't think are fish, like dolphins and whales, which obviously are fish, but are not called fish by people who are like
dolphins and whales aren't fish.
Well, they've got
mammals.
fins. They've got fins on them, and they live in the water, and they go around like fish. So that you got to get up early in the morning, as far as I'm concerned, to say why they're not a fish.
So listeners need to understand that Paul has a mortal fear of lobsters. It's not a joke, actually. He really is very, very frightened about them.
Well,
so,
they're terrifying. They've got big pincers
the last
on
thing
them.
you'd want to do is tweet a gif of a lobster at him or anything like that. I'd really encourage you not to do it.
I would be very happy for there to be a zillion more lobsters and all kinds of fish in the sea, because it's going to be it's like the natural world is sort of perfect before we arrived, and it'll be perfect when we let it go back to what it was doing.
No, Paul, because you are part of nature, so you need to commune with the lobsters.
Yeah, okay, but probably wearing my anti-pincer shoes. Just saying. I mean,
Christiana, didn't you trick Paul once with a toy lobster? Come on, tell us the story.
I did. I put a plastic lobster that was very evidently made out of plastic.
It was not easy to see it was plastic. No, it wasn't.
Oh, come on. It's very evidently a plastic lobster.
In your flat.
And he almost jumped out of the balcony and committed suicide.
Frankly, you know.
He was so scared. He was
perspiring.
Wasn't
scared exactly. It was just a little bit unconventional. One doesn't typically expect to find
an unusual environment.
Look, I mean, nature has many different. I mean, the dinosaurs. Some of them are frightening, but we are very happy about them. Of course, they've gone now, and they're made into fossil fuels, which we buy every day, but not for long. Right, moving swiftly on.
Right. We are going to return to this issue. This is a critical issue. And, you know, we're not going to get to 1.5 degrees, which, of course, we have to do. Halve emissions this decade. This is the critical decade. But we also have to preserve at least 30% of land and ocean by 2030, if not more. We need to engage with this issue. We need to change our farming practices. We who care about this climate issue need to educate ourselves and understand more about this. So we're going to return to this issue in the next few months because it's going to become quite a hot topic and a central part of the COP. And I'm not going to sign off without noticing that Paul wants to say something.
Well, I'm asking you, Tom, can businesses, investors, can everyone start getting behind the 30 by 30 campaign? Is that like an invitation that we all back governments, get your whatever? Is it governments only in 30 by 30 or can everyone be?
No, it's everyone.
There you go.
I'm also struck by the 2030 deadline is coming up over and over again, right? The first ones that chose that 2030 deadline was the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, to be achieved by 2030. Then we now know from climate scientists that we have to be at 1/2 greenhouse gas emissions as compared to today by 2030, and now the 30 by 30 on land and ocean. So, if there ever was a decisive decade, this is it. How incredible that from very different avenues of approach, we've all landed on 2030 being the year in which we have to redo most of our economic structures, certainly most of our behaviors, most of, if not all of our financial incentives. It really is quite amazing, the turnaround that we have to achieve by 2030.
We can, we must, we will.
Yep. Get some rest, everybody. It's going to be a busy 9 years. All right. Now then, we have some music for you. Mr. Bruce will be playing us out, and we kick off with a few words from him. Thanks for being here this week. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Hi, my name is Mr. Bruce, and I've just released a track called I Am Disaster. As you can tell from the title, it's a little heavier in outrage rather than optimism. The song was conceived as a result of a horrendous feeling of culpability for the climate crisis, the frustration at being part of a system which seems hell-bent on pushing the planet towards its multiple tipping points. The track is being released with a stop-motion animation made out of tinfoil, which depicts the unenviable odyssey of climate refugees. I hope you like it, and thanks for having me on my favourite podcast.
You can keep it up, but I won't go away. I am the laws that dictate. You think your toys will save the day, but I tell you it's too late. I'm the genie in the bottle you smashed, but you didn't wish for this. The air you suck in as you crash before a scream leaves your lips. Big budget blockbusters can't compete with the scale I'm working with. Old Testament style, you better start saving your superlatives. I am disaster, I am them. You didn't expect to meet me so soon. I am disaster, I am them. How does it feel to know you're not immune? Keep on convincing yourself that it's happening to them, not us. Keep telling yourself it's a conspiracy, cause it sounds ridiculous. I am ridiculous, I'm like Captain Planet's evil twin, with my powers combined to disrupt earth, water, fire and wind. I am disaster, I am them. You didn't expect to meet me so soon. I am disaster, I am them. How does it feel to know you're not immune? Convenience you feel you need, excess that satisfies greed, growth at all costs, blindness to what you lost. I am disaster, I am them. You didn't expect to meet me so soon. I am disaster, I am them. How does it feel to know you're not immune? I am disaster, I am them.
That was crazy. I love that song. Mr. Bruce, everybody, with I Am Disaster. You know, that song brings up so many memories. I really haven't listened to drum and bass music like that since I remember playing Halo, listening to drum and bass. Anyway, yes, that song was awesome. There's a stop animation music video that goes along with the song. You have to see it. It's entirely done with tinfoil. I can't even begin to describe how much work went into it. So go to the show notes for that. And also, while you're there, Mr. Bruce is proudly supporting the Environmental Justice Foundation. So if you have a moment, watch the video and then sign the petition to help recognize the legal status of climate refugees. So thank you for doing that. Okay, my name is Clay. I'm the producer of this podcast. New season, new credits. For our regularly scheduled weekly episodes, I'm cutting some of the formalities and repetitive items, and I'm going to be playing around with this format, having fun, but keeping it short. So in that spirit, thank you, Rita El Zaghloul, for coming on the show. You can connect with her on Twitter and LinkedIn in the show notes, and please do. The people we have on the podcast are people. If you have a word of encouragement or enjoyed them being on the show, just send them a message, give them a follow. I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. And you can follow us too at Global Optimism. We actually have a brand new website, outrage+Optimism.org. We just launched it, still has that new electric car smell. I'm supposed to keep this podcast down to like 30 minutes, but with the music and everything, I think it might be like 33, 34, 35, 36, maybe? Anyway, next week, tune in to find out if I still have a job. And we have an episode on the future of food. So hit subscribe and, well, hopefully, I'll see you then. Bye.